So, welcome everybody. I am so excited to be here with Amanda Mason for this workshop, Breaking the Divorce Mold, Why the Legal System Gets It Wrong and How You Can Do Better. So, Amanda is a divorce attorney, CEO, and founder of Solagree, which we will be talking about. And Amanda, do you mind giving a little introduction?
Not at all. Hi, everyone. I'm honored to spend a little time with you today. Yes, that's right. So I'm a divorce attorney by trade. I've spent over 20 years practicing law. And I was, very successful in the courtroom, had a very, lucrative, I'll say, practice. But I looked around and said, this is not fair to the people that we're trying to serve in the system. And it's a product of the system. It's not because necessarily anyone is a bad actor in the system. So I a few years ago decided we're going to start focusing on what we can do better, what exists that's a better alternative, and how to put things together in a better way for people. So I'm also a mediator. I'm licensed in North Carolina and Georgia to practice law, but I'm a mediator and a trained arbitrator. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little while. But I'm also a survivor of divorce. I actually went through my very own child custody trial, and I took the stand as a practicing attorney who seemed to know everything about the system and the law, and I still felt all the anxiety and stress. Thankfully, that was many years ago, but that certainly guided my philosophy when I was practicing law and what I'm doing today.
Thank you for sharing that. I think many people in this profession have experienced divorce and know how it feels. So it's really
Mhm.
helpful when you're working with someone who understands that. So why don't we start with how to hire the right attorney?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we begin, I think there's going to be an opportunity for folks to ask questions at the end. So, feel free to keep those in mind, and I'm happy to stick around and talk to anyone who wants to. And we'll also give you some information if you want to follow up with me. But yeah, hiring the
And
right. Go
people
ahead.
people can put their questions into the chat at any time.
Yeah, thank you for that. So hiring the right attorney, this is the critical question that people need to know the information for when they're thinking about separation or they are getting separated. Is how do we get to the right people? And then, yeah, the first person we usually think about is the attorney, right? Because that's the system again says hire the right attorney. So the first thing is know who you are and know what your goals are going to be because hiring a divorce attorney is very personal. It's not like hiring a real estate attorney or agent. It's really truly it goes to the heart of who you are. It goes to your family. So be confident in who you are. So who are you? You are strong. We know that by the fact that you're here, you're gathering information. You're good people. Almost everyone going through a divorce has goodness to them. And you are people who deserve peace. And that's the aim for what we're doing and what we're talking about today. So, one thing I like to tell people when they're thinking about who they're hiring is that if you're of the belief that what's going to make you whole and what you want in the moment is to get revenge against your soon to be ex, this is not going to give you peace. This approach is going to give you the opposite of it. And if you think you want to fight this in a courtroom, again, think again. That is an awful, terrible way to get through the process. And quite frankly, this notion that we're going to get justice in a courtroom simply isn't factual. Justice quite often is unavailable in a courtroom. So knowing that all of that, knowing that you're better than that, we want to frame how we approach getting to know our potential attorneys with that lens. And bear in mind too, even if you hate your ex right now, we want to think about why would we spend another dime on them than we have to another day of our lives than is necessary. We want to get out from under this black cloud as efficiently as possible. So knowing your goals when you're figuring out who your professionals are going to be, it is my advice that you become educated even before you go to an attorney. And it may be that some of you are here for that very reason, is you want to get more information. Um, it is wonderful when clients come to an attorney's office and they have already been talking with a qualified, well-recommended divorce related therapist or couples therapist or a divorce coach. because you're coming in with someone who's already given you some information and can be part of your team. So I love when someone, when I was practicing law, would come to me and they already had that part of the team in place because I knew I was going to have backup to help this person get through the process. The other person that I recommend that you talk to even before you go to an attorney is a qualified certified divorce financial analyst or a CDFA. So these are people who are really highly trained, skilled, and certified to help the couple really tailor the document exchange process to what they actually need. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But going into the attorney's office, understanding your needs and your circumstances is really the top way to make sure you're going to get an attorney that gels with your needs. How to find them? Certainly get referrals. Get referrals from those people. So if you are talking to a divorce coach or therapist or working with a CDFA, they're going to know. They're going to know the right people because they're in the business. They're going to get you to people who are going to help get you through the process efficiently, but steer you clear of someone who will lead you down the dark, cavernous 2, 3, 4 year expensive, endless path that ultimately just doesn't lead to as much satisfaction or necessarily better results. I suggest shopping for an attorney, visit at least a couple. You kind of have to like your divorce attorney. Again, this is personal. So you want to feel a connection to them. You want to feel that they are really seeing who you are and what your needs are. A few red flags I would mention. If they're telling you that court is the only way to handle your circumstances, that's a big red flag. You want an attorney that's going to speak to you about all of the options that are out there. Um, Another thing is if they're telling you kind of exactly what you want to hear, you know, you're right, let's go get him, let's go sue him, let's go take him for every penny he's worth. That may feel good for a moment, but that is something that you'll carry with you for a long, long time. And it will be very expensive and very draining on you, on your children. And remember, your children, you're aiming for the lifelong relationship with them. So always consider that when you're considering your goals. It's not just about when they're little. We want to make sure we have good long-term connections with them where they don't build any resentments or have traumas. Um, and then the other red flag I like to think about is were you they referred to you or did you go to them because they're the bulldog who will fight for you? That's a big uh-oh, because if that's the mentality we're coming at this from, we got a lot of work to do to get healthy. So we want to come at this for someone who can represent your rights, knows your rights, but also can do so in an effective manner. Good signs. They're already talking to you about how to get to the finish line. They're already saying, here's a nice potential path that we can go down that will make sure that you get through this thoroughly but quickly so that you don't have to have this drag on. And another really good sign is if they're already talking to you about alternative methods to going to court. Again, court bad, alternative good in most circumstances. Very few people actually should be in the traditional court system. It is not designed for families in need of reconciliation of their personal circumstances. It's designed to be adversarial. It's a person versus a person. Doesn't help the circumstances. It's fine for criminal. It's fine for some other situations, a business versus a business. But when we're talking about people, it's really not helpful.
Thank you for that information. One thing I wanted to point out, when you said talk to a CDFA and potentially a coach before you talk to an attorney, I love that advice because I think a lot of people just immediately think they have to talk to the attorney first. And what I was just talking to someone today about, the attorney is the most expensive professional that you're going to
Right.
hire. So
Absolutely.
knowing how to use your attorney before you start working with them is totally the right thing to do. And you as an attorney to say that, I think holds a lot more power and respect than me as a divorce coach, you know what I mean, or a CDFA. But it's true. I mean, the attorneys are not the experts on the finances. They're not the experts on the
Right.
emotional piece. They're experts on the law. And so you need to really get more information before you start working with your attorney. So put your questions into the chat. We will get to them as soon as we're done with the presentation. Um, the question I think is a lot of people have is how do you exchange information constructively with your soon-to-be ex? Because a lot of times attorneys ask for all that information and then it gets really expensive and maybe not the best way to do that.
Yes. Okay. So this is one of my pet peeves, and this is just kind of a dirty little secret that I'm going to let out of the bag. And I'm telling on myself as someone who's been in the business, who's been in that chair. So attorneys are not the best at gathering information and analyzing it. The attorneys are, again, because they're defensively gathering, and I mean, just even my hands, they're defensively gathering information. They're going to ask for everything under the sun. They're going to ask for years of bank records, years of real estate records, on and on and on. And it takes so long to gather everything they want that by the time you've gotten everything to them that they think they want, you're now 6 months further down the road. And we got to go back and get even more and more and more. It's not an efficient way. And by the way, attorneys aren't even that great at analyzing those documents. Not all of them. Some of them are financially oriented, but for the most part, a divorce attorney is not going to be the best person to do that. And they don't even really like doing it that much. And we're not even going to use all of that at the end of the day. We would just use a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of this, a bit of that. So why did we go to all of that effort? Again, we're defensively gathering documents just in case the other side has something that we want to have. The best people to do the financial exchange of information, again, we're going back to the certified divorce financial analysts. I'm not a certified divorce financial analyst, but I had one on my staff full time when I was an attorney. And the reason for that is what we're talking about. We want to have a situation that's not a war zone. And by the way, this document exchange process is the most common way for a divorce to become that war zone. Because if you want to play hide and seek with documents and play other games with information exchange, that's just going to drive up your costs and the length of time, and also the resentments and anxiety between you and your spouse. Not helpful. So let's get to a CDFA. You can have one that's shared, or you can each have one on your own. But this is someone who can tailor it just to what you need in order to figure out what needs to be resolved in your case. Very often, you'll actually have a lot of agreement that you don't even know about until you start working with someone. The other thing that I like when a CDFA is involved is because they can help educate you about what your outlook is. So it's not merely gathering documents to prepare for a trial. It's gathering information in order to give you a future and a path forward, an outlook. What is my life going to be like? What are my income needs going to be? Can I keep the house? These are really important questions that matter to you much more than what a judge, a stranger in a black robe, might say in 3 or 4 years when you finally do get in front of them. They're not planning your future. So let's have someone that helps you have the agency to do that. And understand, by the way, it seems in every relationship, and Jill, tell me if you disagree with me, one person's more the bookkeeper of the household than the other. And it doesn't even necessarily, in my experience, relate to who was the more educated person. It's just someone does it. And so the other person is probably going to need a little education to kind of get back on even footing. So work with a CDFA and know that transparency between you will drive the costs down for each of you, which is good.
Yeah, no, totally. There's usually one spouse who's in charge of the finances, and so one of the two spouses is going to have to get a lot more information than the other one. Um, so, coming from you, when and what do you ask your attorney? Right? That's an important thing to know.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is a balancing act. On the one hand, you want to be informed. On the other hand, you don't want to drown your attorney with incessant questions, to try and understand every single nuance. Because, as attorneys, it's often more art than science. And we need the breathing room in our minds, in your case, to be able to do our art, to perform for you what we need to. And it just is kind of part of that process. So this is where, again, a divorce therapist or coach can come in really handy, because they can kind of answer some of the questions or address some of the anxieties while siphoning off that for your attorney to have the space to do the work. What I would say is, again, you want to come from a lens of making sure that your attorney's goals continue to be in line with your goals, and your goals may shift over time. So be communicative about that. Ask your attorney about early interventions. How can we get this on a good track? How can we stay out of the courtroom? If they appear to be in a collision course for taking you into a courtroom, you need to demand to know why. You need to make sure that that really truly is in line with your goals and best interests. So, if they're not in line with your goals, insist on something different, and consider getting a second opinion from another attorney. I often was the one giving a second opinion, and very often I would say, I think this is a conversation you need to go back and have with your attorney, because I think that you can get this back on the rails if you just communicate to them what you've just said to me. So it doesn't hurt to have that.
Such good information. So there are alternatives to court, and there, we talk about mediation and we talk about arbitration. Why don't we talk about all the alternatives to court and
Yeah.
your information?
Yeah, there's several alternatives to court. We'll talk about my company's hybrid method, that, in my opinion, combines all the best in a moment. But know that each of the options that are alternatives can work if the parties are really motivated. But a hybrid method, is kind of, in my experience, the best way to deal with making sure that everyone stays at the table and tries to keep working towards agreement, particularly the higher conflict we get. But so, first of all, private negotiations. You and your spouse can negotiate with each other. You don't necessarily even need an attorney for that, although I would advise that that would be helpful. Again, when you're highly motivated, that's great. You can have an attorney, draft. Your other attorney, the other person's attorney, can go back and forth and negotiate with you on that document. The downside is that's a very vulnerable process because, again, you've got two attorneys who are in the system and they're looking for issues with your circumstances, and it polarizes people quite often. So again, when it works, it works. When it doesn't, then it becomes difficult. There's a particular type of process for that called collaborative law. And that's where each party hires their own attorney, and then they agree that if they can't come to total agreement, this is an oversimplification, but if they can't come to a total agreement between themselves in that process, then they start over with new attorneys. Uh, Again, when it works, it's great. But unfortunately, I did have to clean up a lot of cases that had come out of that process in my career. And I found that people were that much more polarized when someone walked away because of the resentments. So the key is, how do we get to a point where someone can't just walk away from the process? Mediations are wonderful. That's where you have a neutral person who is highly trained, usually an attorney, not always, but usually an attorney in your state, who helps you negotiate and discuss ways towards resolving the disputes, resolving the things that you can't bridge on your own. Mediation is wonderful. Again, if all you have is mediation, the only alternative being court, again, someone can walk away at any time, and we want to keep down that level of resentment if we can when that happens. Arbitration is wonderful, and I'm a big proponent of it. As you'll hear, arbitration is a private dispute resolution process. It allows for people to have a relaxed atmosphere and informality to a process to have someone make decisions for them when they can. It's a safety net. So it's not court. An arbitrator is going to be someone that is selected based upon their experience, based upon their temper towards the subject matter that's in front of them. Not every judge is meant for family law judging. A lot of judges, first of all, have no experience in family matters when they take the bench. And they quickly become very burnt out because the cases that are in front of them oftentimes don't have subject matter that particularly appeals to them. And we don't like that. We want people who are trained to be kind to the people who need it the most, which is everyone going through a divorce. So the arbitrator is going to be able to provide that kindness and the resolution process that can be a safety net. Which leads, and Jill, if you don't mind, I'm just briefly going to share my screen if I have that ability, just to briefly show you, and you can contact me if you want to learn more. But this is the Solagree method. This is the method that I began developing years ago with deeper education, with working with business counsel and ethics attorneys to try and get to a process that would really provide the total package for everyone. So in the Solagree process, everyone comes through having an arbitration agreement. So when you're going through the whole rest of the process. You know, at the end of the day, that no one gets to walk away and take you to court. And that helps dial down the anxiety that causes people to have frustrations, that helps dial down that fear that if I compromise on this piece over here, that might get used against me in court someday. We don't want those dynamics. So if we know at the end of the process, we can't agree on absolutely everything, but we're going to have a safety net to resolve things in a friendlier fashion between us, that makes us more invested in phases 1 and 2, which is the intake process and the mediation process. So what we really want is for everyone to agree so that the arbitrator doesn't have to make any decisions for them. And we maximize that through our 3-step process. And at the end of it, the parties get a binding document called an arbitration award that's going to incorporate all of the wonderful things that they've agreed upon in order to move forward. And then that will get filed in court. We usually recommend an attorney to represent at least one person to do that final step. But it's a great process. It's very fulfilling to watch couples come through and resolve their issues in months and not years. Everything's virtual in our process. And so that means you can be home, you can be where you're comfortable. You don't have to be in a stranger's office. And you don't go into a courtroom with someone in a black robe. We're just going to get along as best we can and get through this, roll up our sleeves, get the work done, and move forward quickly. Because Jill, I know you know as much as I do that as long as they are in process, that black cloud is there. You can function, you can put one foot in front of the other, but it is hanging over there. And as soon as it's done, the deep breath starts, which is where we want you to be.
Absolutely.
And you look fucking awful.
And what is really amazing is like companies like this didn't ever exist before. So there's a lot more options for people, and knowing about this method is really important. And where is it available?
So you can talk to me through emailing amanda@solagree.com. We are nationwide. Thank you for asking me that, Jill. We are increasing our coverage state by state by state. The way we operate is we recruit wonderful panels of highly vetted professionals in each state to take really good care of our clients. We are the administrator of the process, so we make sure that everyone follows the rules, that our professionals adhere to the highest code of ethics, and that if something does go wrong, I'm going to hear about it. So unlike a judge that has no oversight, if one of my professionals makes an egregious mistake, I simply don't hire them again, which means they're motivated to do good work and it's not a problem.
Absolutely. So I want to start taking questions. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we start with questions?
No, I'd love to hear some questions.
Okay. So, and put your questions in the chat. There's a couple there already. So are your recommendations any different if you have a high conflict X? That's a good question.
That's a great question. My recommendations are even more strong, even more deeply rooted if we have a high conflict circumstance. So the nice thing with my process is that you can, there are ways that we can tailor it. So let's say there's a domestic violence issue. We can deal with that with some separation between the parties. Let's say that there's a complex business valuation. We have ways of adjusting the process for that. Let's say we've got a foot dragging person, because that happens a lot. One person just wants to put their head in the sand. We have anti-ghosting provisions in our standard ground rules. This is the best way to deal with high conflict. You don't want to have to go into a sticky process that's going to take forever. That's going to get you even further into conflict.
All right. How to avoid or change from going to a court when other party's attorney wants to go to court and mother doesn't have an attorney.
Yeah, that's really hard because, of course, you know, any alternative to court is by agreement. So the court does have that's the biggest benefit to court, is that the court process does have the power to force people into its jurisdiction. The best way to do that, and I have some talking points that I can provide to anyone who wants to, just shoot me an email, amanda@solagree.com. But the best thing is let your spouse talk to me if they're not sure what they want to do. I'm a neutral person, so I can speak to each of you separately together. I'm happy to speak to any attorneys that are involved as well, but trying to appeal to what is rational in the other person. So do you really want to spend all this money? Do you really want to have this be a public spectacle? this is a process that will empower you more than anything else. So it's hard, right? It's hard when it's going down that track, but I guess just know that we can provide information and talking points, and I'm here. This is my life's work, so I'm talking to people all day long. If I can be helpful to you, I'm happy to.
Yeah, thank you. Um, do both parties have to consent, agree to engage in a process like this?
Yeah, so they do. There's no mechanism where someone, can force someone into an alternative. Again, that's, the court's the only thing that can force a spouse to participate, which is unfortunate. But hopefully, with some changes to our laws and some progressive movement in our country about what we're doing, more people will turn to an alternative option.
Yeah, and the courts are busy, so they should want
Very,
the alternative options.
yeah.
7:30 eval was complete. How to stop more litigation now? 7:33 is authorized. Our daughter is missing school over this.
Right. So that's one of the complex situations that we're talking about. I'm willing to speak to anyone about this method. I just really think understanding when you're dealing with children, the lifelong relationship you have with your children is the most precious thing, and it is the most precious gift you can give to them. And I speak from experience as an attorney and as a mom who now has grown children who have come through the process. These kids are going to be the ones making end of life decisions for you. They're going to make decisions for you when you can't make decisions for yourselves anymore. So it behooves both parents, if at all possible, to try and pull out of the process. It can be done by agreement wherever you are in the process. Maybe mid-trial would be hard, but you could even say, we'd like a recess. We'd like to consider something else. This hurts. We don't want to keep going like this. So
Yeah.
it's tough, though. I really validate that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had clients who are sitting ready to start trial, and then one of them asks them to go outside and they settle right before
Sure,
the trial starts. That happens too.
sure. Happens a lot.
If a spouse wants a divorce, is there any negative consequence to the other spouse moving out of the marital home before any agreements are reached? That's a good question. Yeah.
That is a good question. Okay, so I have to give my disclaimer. I'm not here to give you legal advice, but I can give you legal information. First of all, you're going to want to check with an attorney to get legal advice on this. Every state is nuanced, but at some point, I'll tell you, in my experience, that was a source of frustration was the I'm staying in the house mentality, and the concept of abandonment. If I leave the house, am I abandoning the house? And it really wasn't something that played out. If you're going to get a separation, someone's got to move out at some point. So again, nuanced state by state, but the idea that moving out is going to create more legal troubles is a highly overblown concept. And what I will say is that's a different analysis from the practical analysis of whether you can afford to move immediately into a separate location.
Well, I know that my attorney told me if the spouse who is wanting to get alimony moves out, it might affect their ability to get the alimony because they would be looked at as being able to afford something. I think if the spouse who would be paying the alimony moves out, I don't see a negative, except for that
Yeah.
they can't come back in the house and the kids are in the house, and so that might be an issue. Which,
Yeah, and there are all kinds of smaller issues to that. And there again, so maybe New Jersey looks more towards that as a factor than, North Carolina or Georgia where I practiced.
right.
Again, someone's got to move out at some point. So it's hard to imagine, really that in every circumstance, trapping the spouse into the marital residence is going to be the best option. But
Yeah.
that's where we would want to have you, with a CDFA, with counsel, kind of looking at these nuances in the state where you live.
So I have a question about Solagree. If one of the spouses isn't sharing all of the information, how do you handle that?
I love this question. So, Solagree thrives and operates on a core tenet of transparency and candor. If the CDFA identifies, or the mediator, anyone along the way, identifies that one spouse is trying to hold up the process, We have standard ground rules that all of our clients are bound to cooperate with. And I have those anti-ghosting provisions in there for this very reason. In the worst case scenario, the arbitrator, well, in a mid case scenario, the arbitrator can become involved earlier in the process and start making rulings about that. If the process still continues, then it's possible by virtue of the ground rules to get the court involved for the limited purpose of forcing the other person to comply. And ideally, because it's just a narrow issue, you can get into most courtrooms faster to get those narrow issues dealt with. But knowing that all of this is out there, knowing that attorneys' fees are at risk, knowing that all of these things allows Solagree, the administrator, to issue warnings and give you that information. And it allows the practitioners, the CDFAs, the mediators, the arbitrators to issue warnings as well, so that hopefully we don't have to go that far.
Great. And somebody asked, can I use my own CDFA or does a new one have to be hired?
You can absolutely use your own CDFA, and I welcome introducing new CDFAs to our program. And a lot of times, what people will do is they'll decide they each want their own CDFA just to kind of make sure they've got someone, on their side, having their back. And that might be the circumstance where you would want that and then get a separate CDFA, or your spouse may say, no, I'm fine with it. We can work with the CDFA you've been utilizing. Let's save some money. I see both cases. Yeah, it's great.
That is great. And I don't know if you want to talk about this, but Solagree is like a fixed fee. Is that correct?
Right. So one of the for most of our cases, they're in what we call our Solagree Expedite program, and part of our core beliefs is that we want to give people a flat fee structure so that they can predict, so that they know it's not going to float on into tens and tens of thousands of dollars. We want to make it predictable for you. We break it up into 3 payments so that you can have a little wiggle room in your budget. It depends. The fees depend state by state because, of course, the professionals charge differently in each state. So if you want to talk more in depth about it, we can have a consult that's based on where you reside. But yes, thank you for that. Occasionally, the high conflict cases or cases that just need a little more love, they're a little more in depth. They may not necessarily be high conflict, but they've got more components to it. They will go into a little bit of a different program with us, which has more of an hourly basis in the arbitration process. But that's by far the minority.
That's great to know. Because if you're giving a warning, like you were saying, by somebody wasn't cooperating, that would be part of the fee. You're not paying extra for that, like when you like submit a motion with the court and an attorney has to do that, that you're paying a lot of money to do that. So
That's right.
it's a much
And they may end up having to pay your attorney's fees if they're not cooperating. That's something that you could potentially seek as a remedy in court. So
right, exactly. So it is, I mean, it is a lot to take in, I think, for people, because if you're not familiar with how the court process works, this type of an agreement and a process is going to be a lot better in a lot of ways. So, and mediation in general is better, but like you said, the negative is somebody can walk away, and
that's
this
right.
you can't do that without consequences. So this was
Mhm.
great. Really, really great.
Wonderful questions, everyone. Thank you
I
for
know.
that.
I know. If there are no more questions, we're gonna let everybody go. But it's really so great to learn about these options and know that there are other options than court or hiring attorneys for your divorce process. So I really appreciate you giving your time and your all
My
your
pleasure.
experience to everybody. And I thank everybody who is here for participating.